The security guard thought he was conducting a routine bag check at the city courthouse entrance. He had no idea he was about to discover America's most decorated female soldier, a woman who had single-handedly saved 47 lives in Afghanistan and had been presumed dead for 8 years. The metal detector screamed as Maria Santos approached, her weathered canvas bag triggering every alarm in the building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Guard Thompson's hand moved to his radio, standard protocol for a positive hit. But when he opened the bag's inner compartment, his training abandoned him completely. Nestled between grocery coupons and prescription bottles lay the distinctive blue ribbon and bronze star of the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The engraving read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty." Below it, a name that made Thompson's blood run cold, Captain Maria Elena Santos, 75th Ranger Regiment. The same Maria Santos who had died in the mountains of Kandahar province, whose memorial service had been attended by generals and congressmen, whose sacrifice had inspired a generation of female soldiers. Yet here she stood in faded jeans and a grocery store uniform, very much alive, watching Thompson's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and something approaching terror. Because Thompson recognized more than just her name. He recognized her face from the classified briefings he'd received during his own military service, back when he'd carried a different rank and a very different mission. The woman every intelligence agency in the world believed was dead had just walked into his courthouse carrying evidence of heroism that should have been buried with her. The implications hit Thompson like a physical blow. If Maria Santos was alive, then everything about Operation Crimson Dawn had been a lie. The mission that had cost him his leg and his career. The operation that had left 12 good soldiers dead in a valley that officially didn't exist. The same operation where Captain Santos had allegedly died saving her unit from an ambush that, according to his orders, was supposed to eliminate them all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1. The life she built from ashes. Maria Santos had spent 8 years perfecting the art of being invisible. At 42, she looked like any other night shift grocery clerk in Millfield, Pennsylvania, a Rust Belt town where people minded their own business and asked few questions about newcomers who paid their bills on time. Her apartment above Romano's Delicatessen was sparse but clean, furnished with second-hand pieces that could be abandoned at a moment's notice. The neighbors knew her as a quiet woman who worked double shifts at Save More Supermarket, who attended early Mass at St. Catherine's every Sunday, and who sometimes helped elderly customers carry their groceries to their cars. They didn't know that her seemingly random acts of kindness were actually intelligence gathering, that her grocery cart routes through the aisles followed patterns designed to observe every exit and potential threat, or that the rosary she carried contained a GPS tracker linked to an emergency extraction protocol she hoped never to use. Maria's transformation from decorated war hero to small-town grocery clerk had been meticulously planned during 6 months in a CIA safe house outside Langley. The agency's best identity specialists had crafted Maria Santos the civilian, complete with employment history, medical records, and a tragic backstory that explained her reluctance to discuss her past. According to her official documentation, she was a widow whose husband had died in a construction accident, a woman starting over in a new town to escape painful memories. The truth was far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Captain Maria Elena Santos had been the most effective special operations soldier of her generation, a linguist and tactical specialist who could infiltrate terrorist cells with the same ease most people displayed ordering coffee. She spoke 6 languages fluently, could pilot everything from helicopters to motorcycles, and possessed an instinctive understanding of combat psychology that made her invaluable for the military's most sensitive missions. Her Medal of Honor had been earned during a rescue operation in the Hindu Kush Mountains, where her 12-person unit had been ambushed while attempting to extract a captured CIA operative from a Taliban stronghold. When the ambush left half her team dead and the rest pinned down by superior firepower, Maria had volunteered for a solo infiltration that military strategists later called impossible. She had climbed 3,000 feet of sheer rock face in sub-zero temperatures, eliminated 17 enemy combatants with precision that bordered on supernatural, and personally carried 4 wounded soldiers to safety while coordinating air support through a broken radio. The official record stated that Captain Santos had died during the final phase of the extraction when a Taliban rocket struck her position. Her body was never recovered, a fact attributed to the treacherous mountain terrain and immediate Taliban counterattack that forced American forces to withdraw. The military had held a closed-casket funeral with full honors, her Medal of Honor presented posthumously to an empty grave, while her parents wept over what they believed were their daughter's remains. But Maria hadn't died in those mountains. She had discovered something during the mission that made her survival inconvenient for certain people in positions of power. The CIA operative she'd been sent to rescue hadn't been captured by the Taliban. He had been selling weapons to them, using his intelligence position to facilitate arms deals that put American soldiers at risk. When Maria uncovered evidence of the conspiracy, she found herself facing a choice between exposure and elimination. The ambush hadn't been a Taliban operation. It had been orchestrated by corrupt elements within her own command structure, designed to silence the operative and anyone who might have learned his secrets. Maria's apparent death had been the perfect solution, allowing the conspiracy to continue while eliminating the one person skilled enough to expose it. Her survival had been achieved through a combination of tactical brilliance and desperate improvisation, but staying alive meant accepting that she could never return to her old life. The months following her escape from Afghanistan had been the darkest period of Maria's existence. Hidden in safe houses while intelligence analysts debated her fate, she had wrestled with the knowledge that her own government had tried to murder her. The Medal of Honor ceremony had been particularly cruel, watching from a secure location as her parents grieved for a daughter who sat 20 miles away, unable to comfort them or reveal the truth. The decision to remain dead had been pragmatic rather than emotional. The conspiracy that had targeted her remained active. An exposure would have endangered not only her life, but also the families of the soldiers who had died in the ambush. Better to let the world believe Captain Santos had died a hero than risk revealing the corruption that had killed 12 good people for the sake of an arms-dealing operation. Maria's handler, a CIA operative named Director Catherine Walsh, had been instrumental in creating her new identity. Walsh understood the delicate balance between protecting a valuable asset and allowing that asset some semblance of normal life. The cover identity had been designed with Maria's psychological profile in mind, placing her in a small town where her military skills could remain dormant while still providing the structure and routine she needed to maintain emotional stability. The grocery store job had been perfect in its mundane simplicity. Maria's supervisor, Mrs. Jennifer Hayes, was a widowed grandmother who appreciated reliable employees and asked few personal questions. The night shift meant minimal customer interaction, allowing Maria to process inventory while her tactical mind remained quietly active, cataloging potential threats and escape routes with the same precision she had once applied to battlefield analysis. Customer interactions provided Maria with a different kind of intelligence gathering. Mrs. Patterson, who shopped every Tuesday for her disabled son, revealed details about local social services and community support networks. Frank Rodriguez, who worked construction and shopped after his evening shift, provided insights into the town's economic struggles and the growing desperation that made communities vulnerable to outside influence. Teenage employees like Danny Morrison shared gossip about local families, information that Maria filed away without conscious intent. The town of Millfield itself had been chosen for specific strategic advantages. Located between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it offered multiple evacuation routes while maintaining the isolated feel that discouraged casual visitors. The population of 8,000 was large enough to provide anonymity, but small enough that unusual activity would be noticed quickly. Most importantly, Millfield had a significant veteran population, people who understood the unspoken code of not asking too many questions about someone's service record. Maria's apartment reflected the careful balance between preparedness and normalcy that defined her existence. To casual observers, it appeared to belong to a woman of modest means who valued cleanliness and order. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, the kitchen stocked with basic necessities, the living room dominated by a television that Maria rarely watched except for news broadcasts that she monitored with professional intensity. Hidden throughout the apartment were the tools of her former trade, concealed with the same meticulous attention to detail that had once allowed her to infiltrate enemy compounds. A false bottom in her bedroom dresser contained forged documents and enough cash to reach any of 6 predetermined safe houses. The bathroom medicine cabinet held prescription bottles that actually contained specialized equipment, night vision contacts, communication devices, and medical supplies designed for field treatment of gunshot wounds. The Medal of Honor itself had been the most dangerous item to keep, a piece of evidence that could expose her true identity to anyone with access to military databases. Walsh had strongly advised against retaining it, arguing that the emotional attachment wasn't worth the security risk. But Maria had refused to abandon the medal, not out of pride, but because it represented the soldiers who had died during the ambush, the men and women whose sacrifice had been perverted by the conspiracy she had uncovered. She carried the medal in a specially designed compartment of her canvas bag, surrounded by everyday items that would deflect casual inspection. The irony wasn't lost on her that America's highest military decoration now lived next to grocery coupons and aspirin bottles, hidden like contraband rather than displayed with the honor it deserved. But symbols of heroism became dangerous when heroism itself had been weaponized by corrupt officials. Maria's daily routine had been carefully structured to maintain operational security while preserving her mental health. Morning runs through Millfield's residential neighborhoods served multiple purposes: physical conditioning, reconnaissance of local activity patterns, and the psychological benefit of movement that reminded her body it was still capable of the fluid grace that had once made her legendary among special operations personnel. Her route varied according to a pattern that appeared random, but actually provided comprehensive coverage of the town's layout. She noted new faces, changes in household routines, and vehicles that appeared where they didn't belong. The information was processed and filed with the same systematic thoroughness that had once allowed her to identify terrorist safe houses from subtle changes in neighborhood behavior. Church attendance at St. Catherine's had initially been part of her cover identity, but Maria found genuine comfort in the ritual and community it provided. Father Miguel Santos, no relation despite the shared surname, was a former military chaplain who recognized something familiar in Maria's bearing without pressing for details. His sermons often touched on themes of forgiveness and redemption that resonated with Maria's struggle to find meaning in her exile from the life she had known. The congregation included several families with military connections, people who understood the particular challenges faced by those who had served in combat zones. Maria's interactions with these families provided her with insights into how military communities processed trauma and loss, information that helped her maintain her own psychological equilibrium while staying alert to potential security threats. Work at Save More Supermarket offered its own form of therapy through the simple satisfaction of completing tasks that had clear beginning and endpoints. Stocking shelves, processing inventory, and managing the automated systems that kept the store running smoothly provided structure without the life-or-death pressure that had defined her military career. Mrs. Hayes had proven to be an understanding supervisor who appreciated Maria's reliability and attention to detail without requiring extensive social interaction. The night shift meant that Maria worked alongside a small crew of employees who were often dealing with their own complicated circumstances. Danny Morrison was saving money for college while supporting his single mother. Patricia Chen was working her way through nursing school. Frank Williamson was a recovering addict who found stability in the routine of honest work. These relationships remained carefully professional, but Maria found herself genuinely caring about her colleagues' well-being in ways that reminded her of the protective instincts that had driven her military service. Customer interactions provided Maria with a window into civilian life that she had largely missed during her years in special operations. Families struggling with medical bills, elderly customers dealing with social isolation, young parents managing the chaos of raising children while working multiple jobs. These ordinary human challenges offered perspective on the broader meaning of the security she had once provided through military action. The most difficult aspect of Maria's new life was the complete isolation from her family and former colleagues. Her parents believed their daughter was dead, a grief that Maria witnessed secondhand through news coverage of memorial events and anniversary observances. Former teammates who had survived other missions continued their military careers, unaware that their presumed dead comrade was stocking cereal aisles 3 states away. Director Walsh maintained contact through encrypted communication channels, providing updates on the ongoing investigation into the corruption that had necessitated Maria's disappearance. Progress was slow, complicated by the classified nature of the original operation and the political connections of those involved in the conspiracy. Each monthly briefing reinforced the necessity of Maria's continued anonymity, while offering little hope for eventual resolution. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The psychological toll of maintaining her false identity had been significant during the early years. Maria had undergone extensive counseling with agency specialists who understood the unique challenges faced by deep cover operatives. The transition from a life defined by clear missions and immediate feedback to one characterized by ambiguity and isolation had required fundamental changes in how she understood her own identity and purpose. Physical conditioning remained crucial for both operational readiness and psychological stability. Maria's apartment building included a small fitness room that she used during off-peak hours, maintaining the cardiovascular fitness and muscle memory that had once been essential for survival. Her workouts were disguised as general fitness routines, but the exercises specifically targeted the skill sets that had made her one of the military's most effective operators. The town's public library became another refuge, a place where Maria could research current events and maintain her understanding of global political developments without raising suspicions about her level of expertise. Librarian Susan Walker appreciated Maria's respectful demeanor and eclectic reading interests, which ranged from gardening magazines to foreign policy journals with stops at mystery novels that reminded her that not all conflicts ended with clear victories. Local restaurants and coffee shops provided opportunities for social interaction that felt safe because of their temporary and public nature. Maria became a regular at Murphy's Diner, where her Tuesday morning breakfast provided consistent human contact without requiring personal revelation. Waitress Carol Thompson appreciated Maria's quiet presence and generous tips, creating a relationship based on mutual respect rather than curiosity about personal history. The hardest moments came during news coverage of military operations, particularly those involving special forces units that Maria recognized from her active service. Watching former colleagues receive decorations for missions she might have participated in created a complex mixture of pride and grief that threatened the emotional equilibrium she had worked so hard to maintain. These feelings were compounded by guilt over her inability to contribute to ongoing operations that she knew, from her insider's perspective, could benefit from her expertise. Maria's evenings were often spent reading military history and tactical analysis, keeping her knowledge current while processing her own experiences through the lens of historical precedent. She found particular comfort in accounts of soldiers who had served with distinction in unpopular or morally ambiguous conflicts, people who had maintained their integrity despite institutional pressures that could have corrupted their sense of duty. The Medal of Honor remained both her most treasured possession and her greatest security risk. On nights when the isolation felt particularly acute, Maria would hold the medal and remember the faces of the soldiers who had died during the ambush, people whose sacrifice had been dishonored by the conspiracy that had killed them. The medal served as a tangible reminder that her survival had purpose beyond self-preservation, that somewhere in her future lay an opportunity to honor their memory through action that would expose the truth about their deaths. Financial security had been arranged through a trust fund that Director Walsh had established using classified appropriations, providing Maria with enough money to maintain her modest lifestyle without raising questions about the source of her income. The grocery store job provided additional income and, more importantly, a social identity that explained her presence in the community. The combination allowed her to live comfortably while maintaining the operational readiness that might someday prove necessary. Maria's medical care was handled through a network of healthcare providers who specialized in treating individuals with classified backgrounds. Regular checkups and psychological evaluations were conducted by professionals who understood the unique health challenges faced by former Special Operations personnel. These appointments required travel to Pittsburgh under cover identities, brief excursions from her normal routine that reminded her of the larger infrastructure supporting her continued anonymity. The grocery store's security systems provided Maria with additional intelligence-gathering opportunities without compromising her cover. Late-night inventory sessions allowed her to monitor the parking lot and surrounding streets for unusual activity. The store's surveillance cameras offered comprehensive coverage of customer behavior, information that Maria processed with the same analytical skills she had once applied to tracking terrorist movements through Middle Eastern marketplaces. Seasonal changes in Millfield provided natural variation in her routine while maintaining the consistency that made her invisible to potential threats. Summer brought increased foot traffic and tourism that required heightened awareness. Winter's isolation offered opportunities for more intensive physical training and research. Spring and fall provided balance, times when Maria could engage more actively with community events without standing out among neighbors who were emerging from or preparing for seasonal hibernation. The local veterans community had been particularly important for Maria's psychological adjustment, providing a social network of people who understood military culture without requiring detailed discussion of specific service experiences. American Legion meetings and Veterans Assistance Programs offered structured social interaction with people who shared common values and experiences, even if the details of Maria's service had to remain classified. These relationships had been carefully managed to provide emotional support without creating security vulnerabilities. Maria's interactions with other veterans focused on shared experiences of transition to civilian life rather than specific military operations. Her insights into adjustment challenges were valued by fellow veterans who didn't realize they were receiving advice from someone who had faced far more extreme circumstances than typical military discharge. Community volunteer work provided additional opportunities for meaningful engagement while maintaining her cover identity. Maria's work with the local food bank leveraged her organizational skills while helping address real needs within the community. Her efficiency in managing inventory and coordinating distribution reflected military training without explicitly revealing its source. The relationships Maria built through volunteer work had proven surprisingly fulfilling, offering her a sense of purpose that had been missing since her forced retirement from active duty. Helping elderly residents access social services, assisting single mothers with emergency food assistance, and organizing donation drives for homeless veterans allowed her to channel her protective instincts into civilian applications that made genuine differences in individual lives. As Maria's 8th year in Millfield approached, she had begun to believe that her new identity might be permanent rather than temporary. The investigation into the conspiracy that had forced her into hiding remained stalled, and the political landscape had shifted in ways that made revelation of past corruption increasingly unlikely. The possibility of spending the rest of her life as a grocery store clerk rather than returning to military service had become more acceptable as she found meaning in her civilian relationships and responsibilities. That sense of permanent peace had been shattered the moment Thompson recognized her face in the courthouse security checkpoint. The carefully constructed walls between her past and present had crumbled in an instant, replaced by the familiar adrenaline surge that had once preceded her most dangerous missions. Maria Santos, the grocery clerk, was about to disappear, replaced by Captain Santos, the soldier, whether she wanted the transformation or not. Thompson's hand trembled as he closed Maria's bag, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd discovered. The courthouse security checkpoint suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on Earth, a collision point between past and present that threatened to destroy carefully maintained lies on both sides. He looked up at Maria, seeing her differently now, recognizing the predatory stillness that marked genuine operators, the way her eyes cataloged exit routes while her posture remained deceptively relaxed. Maria watched Thompson's internal struggle with professional detachment, noting the slight favor of his left leg that suggested old combat injuries, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands that spoke of trauma poorly managed, the way his eyes darted to his radio without quite committing to the action. She had seen that look before, in soldiers who found themselves caught between loyalty and survival, duty and truth. Thompson knew something about Operation Crimson Dawn, something that made her survival inconvenient for people who preferred their secrets buried with their heroes. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, each second increasing the tension until something would inevitably snap. Other courthouse visitors moved past the checkpoint in blissful ignorance, focused on traffic tickets and civil disputes, unaware that two people with enough classified knowledge to topple governments were conducting a silent negotiation that would determine whether anyone left the building alive. Thompson made his choice with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that wrong decisions carried permanent consequences. Instead of reaching for his radio, he handed Maria's bag back to her with movements that were deliberately slow and visible. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of shared understanding between people who had seen too much and survived too little. "You have a good day now, ma'am. Be careful out there." Maria accepted her bag without breaking eye contact, recognizing the warning embedded in Thompson's words. Someone was hunting her. Someone with enough authority to place assets in positions where they could monitor courthouse traffic. The fact that Thompson had chosen to let her pass suggested he was either an ally or someone with his own reasons for avoiding attention from the same people who wanted her dead. The courthouse visit that had brought Maria to Thompson's checkpoint involved legal documentation for her false identity, routine maintenance that Director Walsh's network required every few years to maintain the illusion of a normal life, property tax records, voter registration updates, and vehicle registration renewals that created the paper trail necessary to support her cover identity. The irony wasn't lost on her that maintaining her anonymity required periodic contact with the very government systems that would expose her if examined too closely. Attorney Barbara Chen, no relation to her co-worker Patricia, handled the documentation through a legal aid clinic that specialized in helping people with complicated immigration and identity issues. Chen operated under the assumption that Maria was a domestic violence survivor who had changed her name and relocated for safety. A cover story that explained the need for discretion without requiring detailed explanations that might compromise operational security. But as Maria left the courthouse, she noticed details that transformed routine legal business into potential surveillance detection. A van parked across the street with tinted windows and government plates. Two men in suits whose casual conversation couldn't quite disguise their professional attention to everyone entering and leaving the building. A woman with a camera who took too many pictures of the courthouse facade. Maria's counter-surveillance training activated automatically, the skills that had kept her alive in hostile territory reasserting themselves after years of dormancy. She varied her walking pace randomly, used reflective surfaces to monitor potential followers, and took an indirect route to her car that would force anyone tracking her to expose themselves. The techniques felt natural despite years of disuse, muscle memory preserved like archaeological artifacts from her former life. The drive back to Millfield became an exercise in tactical awareness that reminded Maria why she had been so effective as a special operations soldier. Every vehicle behind her was assessed for threat potential. Every traffic light provided an opportunity to observe patterns. Every turn allowed her to determine whether the surveillance she had detected was real or imagined. By the time she reached the outskirts of her adopted hometown, Maria was certain she was being followed by at least two vehicles operating in a loose rotation pattern designed to avoid detection by untrained civilians. The fact that they maintained surveillance despite her obvious countermeasures suggested either supreme confidence in their abilities or desperate urgency that overrode operational caution. Neither possibility offered much comfort. Maria's apartment building had been chosen partly for its security advantages: single entrance that could be monitored, fire escape that provided alternative egress, landlord who valued privacy and paid minimal attention to tenants' activities. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, she processed the subtle changes that indicated her sanctuary had been compromised. A thread placed across her doorframe had been disturbed. The hallway light bulb that she had deliberately loosened was now secure. Someone had been inside her apartment. Professional search techniques had been employed, the kind of careful investigation that left no obvious evidence but couldn't completely eliminate all traces of intrusion. Maria's hidden security system confirmed the violation. Motion sensors disguised as smoke detectors had recorded activity during her absence. The intruders had been skilled, but not skilled enough to recognize the level of defensive preparation they were encountering. The search had been thorough but not destructive, suggesting intelligence gathering rather than harassment or intimidation. Whoever had entered her apartment wanted information about her activities and connections, not to terrify her into flight or submission. The professional nature of the intrusion confirmed that her past had finally caught up with her present, that the conspiracy she had uncovered in Afghanistan was making its final move to eliminate the last witness to their crimes. Maria's emergency protocols activated with practiced efficiency, the mental checklist she had hoped never to use unfolding with mechanical precision. First priority was communication with Director Walsh, establishing contact with the network that had kept her alive for 8 years. The secure phone hidden in her kitchen ventilation system connected her to an encrypted relay that would route her call through multiple countries before reaching its intended recipient. Walsh's voice carried the tension of someone who had been expecting bad news, confirming Maria's suspicion that recent events were part of a larger pattern rather than isolated incidents. Intelligence reports from multiple sources suggested that the Afghanistan conspiracy was entering its final phase, eliminating evidence and witnesses before statute of limitations could expire or political changes could expose their crimes to investigation. The timing wasn't coincidental. Congressional oversight committees were beginning to examine classified operations from the Afghanistan conflict with unprecedented scrutiny. Journalists were asking questions about discrepancies in official reports. Family members of soldiers killed in suspicious circumstances were demanding answers that might expose uncomfortable truths about military contracting and weapons trafficking. The people responsible for Operation Crimson Dawn were running out of time to tie up loose ends. Maria's survival represented the single greatest threat to their security, not just because of what she had witnessed, but because of her credibility as a Medal of Honor recipient and her tactical skills as a Special Operations veteran. A grocery store clerk making accusations would be dismissed as unstable. Captain Maria Elena Santos, officially dead but very much alive, could trigger investigations that would unravel decades of corruption. Walsh's instructions were clear and urgent: immediate extraction to a secure facility where Maria could be debriefed and protected while investigators decided how to use her testimony. The network had evacuation assets in place within 2 hours of her location, a response time that reflected both the seriousness of the threat and the value placed on Maria's survival. A private aircraft waited at a small airfield outside Pittsburgh, ready to transport her to a facility where her Medal of Honor would once again represent honor rather than liability. But Maria's thoughts turned immediately to the civilian life she had built in Millfield, the relationships that had given meaning to her exile from military service. Mrs. Hayes at the grocery store, who depended on Maria's reliability during understaffed night shifts. Danny Morrison and Patricia Chen, young people who looked to Maria as a stabilizing presence in their own complicated lives. Father Miguel, who had offered spiritual counsel without demanding explanations she couldn't provide. The decision to remain in Millfield rather than accept extraction reflected Maria's evolution from soldier to civilian, the way 8 years of community engagement had changed her priorities and sense of responsibility. Captain Santos would have followed orders without question, accepting that civilian casualties were sometimes necessary for mission success. Maria Santos, the grocery clerk, understood that abandoning her adopted community would expose innocent people to retaliation from enemies who wouldn't hesitate to target anyone associated with her. Walsh's protests carried the weight of professional experience and genuine concern for Maria's safety, but they also reflected the institutional mindset that had originally created the conspiracy they were fighting. Military and intelligence leaders who viewed civilian populations as assets to be protected or obstacles to be overcome, never as communities worthy of the same loyalty offered to military units. Maria's refusal to abandon Millfield represented a fundamental rejection of that mindset. The compromise that emerged from their heated discussion balanced Maria's civilian loyalties with operational necessity. Instead of immediate extraction, Walsh would provide support for an active defense that would expose the conspiracy while protecting Maria's adopted community. Combat assets, intelligence resources, and legal protection would be mobilized to end the threat permanently, rather than simply relocating it to a different theater of operations. Maria's first priority became identifying the scope of the surveillance network that had been deployed against her, information essential for protecting the innocent people who might become collateral damage in the coming conflict. The courthouse checkpoint encounter suggested that Thompson was either a willing participant in the conspiracy or someone being used without his knowledge, a distinction that would determine whether he represented an additional threat or potential ally. Investigation into Thompson's background revealed a complicated history that paralleled Maria's own journey from military service to civilian employment. Sergeant First Class Raymond Thompson had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer, including several months at forward operating bases where Maria's unit had been active. His medical retirement had resulted from injury sustained during an improvised explosive device attack that killed 3 members of his patrol, an incident that occurred just weeks after Operation Crimson Dawn. Thompson's transition to civilian employment had been difficult, marked by struggles with post-traumatic stress and survivor guilt that complicated his attempts to find stable work. The courthouse security position represented his most successful civilian employment, a job that utilized his military training while providing the structure and clear responsibilities that helped him manage his psychological challenges. More importantly, Thompson's military service records included assignments that would have given him access to classified information about special operations missions in his area of responsibility. His recognition of Maria's name suggested familiarity with Operation Crimson Dawn that went beyond official briefings, knowledge that might have made him a target for the same conspiracy that had forced Maria into hiding. Contact with Thompson required careful planning that would avoid exposing either of them to additional surveillance while determining his role in current events. Maria's approach utilized the same infiltration techniques that had once allowed her to gather intelligence from enemy sources, but adapted for civilian application, where violence was not an acceptable option for resolving uncertainty. The American Legion post in Millfield provided neutral territory where veterans could interact without raising suspicions about their motivations. A social environment where shared military experience created natural conversation topics. Maria's attendance at the weekly breakfast gathering represented her first proactive intelligence operation since entering civilian life, a return to active rather than passive security measures. Thompson's presence at the veterans' breakfast wasn't entirely coincidental. Walsh's background research had indicated his regular attendance at these gatherings as part of his ongoing efforts to manage his post-traumatic stress through peer support. The conversation that developed between them began with a casual shop talk common among veterans, but gradually moved toward more sensitive topics as each tested the other's knowledge and motivations. Thompson's revelation about his recognition of Maria's name came wrapped in enough operational detail to confirm his legitimacy, while avoiding specifics that might compromise either of their positions. He had been present during briefings about Operation Crimson Dawn, had seen Maria's photograph in classified documents, and had personally transported equipment that was supposedly being prepared for the mission that had allegedly killed her. More significantly, Thompson had witnessed discrepancies between official reports and observed reality that had triggered his own suspicions about the operation's true nature. Equipment manifests that didn't match actual shipments. Personnel assignments that placed people in positions where they could be eliminated rather than supported. Communications protocols that seemed designed to prevent rather than facilitate coordination between different units. Thompson's decision to maintain silence about these observations had been motivated by the same survival instinct that had kept Maria hidden for 8 years. Recognition that questions about classified operations could be more dangerous than ignorance. But Maria's appearance in his courthouse checkpoint had forced him to confront the possibility that his silence had enabled ongoing crimes rather than protecting him from institutional retaliation. The alliance that formed between Maria and Thompson represented more than tactical cooperation between former soldiers. It embodied a rejection of the institutional corruption that had betrayed their service and the civilian communities they had sworn to protect. Thompson's access to courthouse security systems and his relationships within the local veteran community provided Maria with intelligence assets that complemented her operational skills. Their investigation into current surveillance activities revealed a network more extensive than either had initially suspected. Federal agents using fabricated credentials had been interviewing local business owners about Maria's activities. Private contractors with military backgrounds had been conducting surveillance of her apartment building and workplace. Database searches had been run against her false identity, probing for vulnerabilities in the documentation that supported her civilian life. The scope of resources being deployed against a single grocery store clerk confirmed that Maria's survival represented an existential threat to powerful people with significant governmental connections. The conspiracy wasn't limited to military personnel. It included civilian contractors, federal law enforcement officials, and political figures whose careers depended on preventing exposure of their involvement in weapons trafficking operations. Mrs. Hayes became an unexpected ally when Maria finally revealed selected details about the danger threatening the grocery store and its employees. The older woman's response reflected both protective instincts toward her workers and hard-earned wisdom about institutional corruption from her own experience as a military wife during the Vietnam era. Her offer to coordinate employee security measures provided Maria with additional eyes and ears while demonstrating the community support that had been missing from her military service. Danny Morrison's computer skills proved invaluable for monitoring electronic surveillance and communication intercepts. His gaming-acquired expertise in network security adapted for real-world intelligence gathering. Patricia Chen's nursing school connections provided access to medical facilities and personnel who could assist with emergency treatment if the situation escalated to violence. Frank Williamson's construction experience offered insights into the courthouse building's structural vulnerabilities and alternative access routes. The civilian network that emerged around Maria reflected the same unit cohesion that had made her military service effective, but with additional emotional stakes that military regulations had previously suppressed. These weren't fellow soldiers bound by duty and discipline. They were chosen family members whose safety mattered more than mission success. People worth protecting even at the cost of operational advantages. Community engagement expanded Maria's understanding of local resources and potential threats. while providing her adopted neighbors with security awareness that might save their lives if the conflict escalated beyond her ability to contain it. Participation in town council meetings revealed information about federal agency activities in the area. Volunteer work with emergency services provided access to communication systems and response protocols that could prove crucial during crisis situations. Father Miguel's offer of sanctuary reflected both religious principle and practical understanding that churches had historically provided refuge for people fleeing political persecution. His military chaplain background gave him insight into the spiritual challenges faced by people forced to choose between institutional loyalty and moral obligation, understanding that supported Maria's decision to fight rather than flee. The timeline for action was compressed by intelligence, indicating that the conspiracy was preparing to escalate from surveillance to direct action within days rather than weeks. Maria's continued survival had apparently convinced her enemies that passive monitoring wouldn't be sufficient to neutralize the threat she represented. Plans were being developed for elimination that would appear to result from random criminal activity rather than targeted assassination. Maria's response strategy balanced her special operations training with civilian protection priorities, designing an approach that would expose the conspiracy while minimizing risk to innocent people. The plan required coordination between multiple civilian and military assets, precise timing that would prevent escalation while ensuring comprehensive documentation of criminal activities. Thompson's role focused on courthouse security systems and his relationships with local law enforcement personnel, who would need to respond appropriately when evidence of federal crimes was presented. His combat experience and institutional knowledge provided crucial support for Maria's operational planning, while his civilian employment offered plausible explanations for activities that might otherwise raise suspicions. The community network's responsibilities involved documentation, communication, and evacuation support that would ensure evidence preservation and civilian safety regardless of the operation's outcome. Each participant understood their specific tasks while remaining ignorant of details that might compromise security if they were captured or coerced. Walsh's support included real-time intelligence about conspiracy movements, federal agency assets positioned to provide backup when criminal evidence was presented, and evacuation resources for civilians who might become targets of retaliation. The operation represented unprecedented cooperation between classified military assets and civilian community resources. Maria's final preparations included psychological readiness for the possibility that her return to active operations might require lethal force, a prospect that conflicted with 8 years of civilian identity development but remained necessary for protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The Medal of Honor in her bag served as a reminder that heroism sometimes required choices that appeared contradictory but were ultimately justified by their consequences. The conspiracy's final move began with systematic targeting of Maria's civilian support network, an escalation that demonstrated both their desperation and their fundamental misunderstanding of the community they were threatening. Thompson received transfer orders that would remove him from his courthouse position within 48 hours. Mrs. Hayes faced sudden federal investigation of the grocery store's employment practices. Danny Morrison was contacted by military recruiters offering opportunities that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Each action was designed to isolate Maria from potential allies while creating legal justifications for federal intervention in local affairs. The pattern reflected standard counterinsurgency tactics adapted for domestic application, treating an American community as occupied territory where civilian populations could be manipulated to achieve strategic objectives. Maria's response demonstrated why she had been selected for the most dangerous special operations missions, combining tactical brilliance with strategic thinking that anticipated enemy actions several moves ahead. Instead of reacting defensively to each individual threat, she used the conspiracy's own escalation as evidence of their criminal intent, while positioning herself and her allies to document activities that would prove their guilt in federal court. The final confrontation was scheduled to take place during the town's annual Memorial Day ceremony, an event that would provide maximum symbolic impact while ensuring extensive documentation by media and civilian witnesses. Maria's survival had already transformed her from hidden witness to active threat. The coming battle would determine whether justice or corruption would ultimately define her legacy. Memorial Day morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made patriotic ceremonies feel divinely orchestrated. Clear skies and gentle breezes that would carry the sounds of speeches and marching bands throughout Millfield's historic downtown district. Maria stood at her apartment window, watching early arriving families claim their spots along the parade route, children clutching small American flags while parents set up folding chairs and prepared for a day of community celebration that would soon become something far more significant. The irony wasn't lost on her that a day dedicated to honoring fallen soldiers would serve as the stage for exposing the conspiracy that had dishonored their sacrifice. The Memorial Day ceremony represented everything the Afghanistan arms dealers had corrupted: service, sacrifice, and the sacred trust between military personnel and the communities they protected. Today would either restore that trust or destroy it permanently. Thompson's voice crackled through the secure communication device hidden in Maria's earpiece, confirming that federal agents had arrived during the early morning hours and were positioning themselves throughout the crowd. The surveillance was more extensive than previous operations, with at least 12 confirmed operatives deployed in coordination patterns that suggested they were prepared for significant resistance. Courthouse security cameras had recorded unmarked vehicles arriving before dawn, and Thompson's contacts in local law enforcement reported unusual federal coordination requests that bypassed normal jurisdictional protocols. Maria's response team was already in position throughout the downtown area, each member carrying out seemingly innocent activities that placed them where they could observe, document, and respond to threats against civilian participants. Mrs. Hayes operated a Memorial Day bake sale booth that provided excellent sightlines to the main speaker's platform, while giving her plausible reasons to interact with community members throughout the event. Danny Morrison live-streamed the ceremony setup for his college journalism project, his multiple camera angles capturing everything while creating a digital record that would be difficult to suppress or manipulate. Patricia Chen volunteered with the medical aid station, her nursing school training providing legitimate reasons for carrying emergency supplies while positioning her to assist if the situation escalated to violence. Frank Williamson worked with the public works crew managing crowd barriers and traffic control, his construction experience allowing him to identify structural vulnerabilities while ensuring civilian evacuation routes remained clear. Father Miguel prepared to deliver the ceremonial invocation, his position on the speaker's platform providing him with comprehensive observation of the entire event. The community network that had formed around Maria represented more than tactical support. It embodied the principles of democratic participation and civic responsibility that the conspiracy had sought to undermine. These weren't trained operatives following military orders, but engaged citizens who understood that protecting their neighbors was a fundamental responsibility of community membership. Their commitment to justice reflected the same values that had originally motivated Maria's military service, before institutional corruption had forced her to choose between loyalty and truth. Director Walsh's federal assets were positioned at strategic locations throughout the region, ready to provide backup when evidence of criminal activity was documented and arrests became necessary. The operation represented unprecedented cooperation between classified intelligence resources and civilian law enforcement, coordination that had required extensive political preparation to ensure that justice would prevail over institutional protection of corrupt officials. The challenge lay in documenting criminal activity without endangering innocent civilians who had come to honor fallen soldiers rather than witness the exposure of military corruption. Maria's tactical planning had to account for families with children, elderly veterans in wheelchairs, and community members who would naturally seek to help if they perceived threats, without understanding the professional nature of the forces involved. Senator Patricia Hawkins arrived with an entourage that included both legitimate security personnel and individuals whose background suggested connections to the Afghanistan conspiracy. Her keynote address was scheduled to focus on military sacrifice and national security, themes that would take on bitter irony, given her role in covering up the weapons trafficking that had resulted in American deaths. Hawkins represented the political protection that had allowed the conspiracy to operate for years without serious investigation. The senator's presence elevated the stakes significantly, transforming a local operation into a national security matter that would attract intense media attention and political pressure. Exposing Hawkins would require evidence so overwhelming that her political connections couldn't suppress it. Documentation that would stand up to the most aggressive legal challenges her allies could mount. Maria's Medal of Honor became central to the operation's symbolic impact, not just as evidence of her identity, but as a representation of the values that the conspiracy had betrayed. The medal would be publicly revealed during the ceremony, transforming her from hidden witness to living symbol of military honor confronting institutional corruption. The moment would be captured by multiple independent cameras and broadcast live to ensure that suppression would be impossible. As the ceremony began with the traditional parade of veterans organizations, Maria moved through the crowd with the fluid grace that had once made her nearly invisible in hostile territory. Her civilian clothes and familiar face allowed her to blend seamlessly with community members she had worked alongside for 8 years, but her operational awareness processed every detail with professional intensity. Federal agents were maintaining surveillance patterns designed for subject elimination rather than simple observation, suggesting that they intended to resolve the threat permanently during the public event. The decision to escalate to lethal action during a Memorial Day ceremony demonstrated both the conspiracy's desperation and their fundamental contempt for the military values they claimed to represent. Using a day dedicated to honoring fallen soldiers as cover for murdering a Medal of Honor recipient revealed the depth of their corruption and provided additional motivation for Maria's response. Thompson's position at the courthouse allowed him to monitor federal communication intercepts and coordinate with local law enforcement personnel who were beginning to understand that something beyond normal security was occurring. His military police background provided credibility with civilian officers who might otherwise question the extraordinary claims being made about federal agency misconduct. The conspiracy's operational timeline became clear as Maria observed their positioning and movement patterns. The assassination attempt would occur during Senator Hawkins' speech, when crowd attention was focused on the speaker's platform and background noise would mask the sounds of violence. Maria's elimination would be attributed to a lone gunman with psychological problems, a scenario that would discredit any posthumous revelations about Afghanistan, while reinforcing the senator's calls for increased security measures. Maria's counter-strategy required precise timing that would expose the conspiracy before they could implement their elimination plan while ensuring that evidence was documented by sources beyond their control. The operation's success depended on transforming their planned assassination into public revelation of their crimes, using their own actions as proof of the corruption they sought to conceal. Father Miguel's invocation provided the opening Maria needed, his prayer for fallen soldiers creating a moment of solemn reflection that focused community attention on the values at stake in the coming confrontation. His words about truth, honor, and sacrifice established the moral framework within which the subsequent revelations would be understood, preparing the community for disclosures that would challenge their assumptions about institutional trustworthiness. As Senator Hawkins approached the podium, Maria made her move with the calculated precision that had once allowed her to infiltrate terrorist strongholds without detection. She walked calmly toward the speaker's platform, her Medal of Honor visible in her hand, the blue ribbon and bronze star catching sunlight in ways that drew attention from everyone in her vicinity. The crowd's reaction began as curiosity about the woman approaching the stage, but shifted to amazement as community members recognized both her face and the significance of what she carried. Thompson's voice in her earpiece confirmed that federal agents were converging on her position, their movement patterns indicating preparation for immediate action that wouldn't wait for the planned timeline. The exposure of Maria's identity had forced them to accelerate their schedule, creating opportunities for tactical response that her original planning had anticipated. Danny Morrison's livestream captured the moment when Maria stepped onto the speaker's platform, his camera work documenting not only her presence but also the federal agent's aggressive reaction to her appearance. The footage would later show the stark contrast between a decorated veteran seeking to address her community and armed federal personnel moving to silence her through force. Senator Hawkins' recognition of Maria was immediate and visceral, her face displaying the kind of fear that confirmed personal knowledge of crimes rather than simple surprise at an unexpected interruption. The senator's attempted retreat from the podium was blocked by Maria's positioning, creating a confrontation that would be witnessed by hundreds of community members and documented by multiple independent sources. Maria's voice carried clearly across the crowd as she began speaking, her words chosen for maximum impact and minimum ambiguity. Citizens of Millfield, my name is Captain Maria Elena Santos, and I died 8 years ago in Afghanistan protecting a conspiracy that sold American weapons to our enemies. The senator standing beside me participated in that conspiracy, and the federal agents moving toward this platform are here to ensure that I die again rather than tell you the truth about how American soldiers were murdered to protect arms dealers. The crowd's initial confusion transformed rapidly into focused attention as Maria displayed her Medal of Honor, explaining its significance and her survival of the operation that had supposedly killed her. Her military bearing and obvious authenticity created credibility that preempted attempts to dismiss her claims as delusion or attention-seeking behavior. Senator Hawkins' attempt to characterize Maria as a disturbed individual was undermined by Thompson's simultaneous release of documented evidence through courthouse security systems, broadcasting classified communications that confirmed both Maria's identity and the conspiracy's scope. The real-time correlation between Maria's testimony and official documentation created a verification process that couldn't be explained away through standard political deflection techniques. Federal agents' movement toward the speaker's platform created the visual evidence that supported Maria's claims about assassination attempts, their aggressive positioning and obvious weaponry confirming for civilian witnesses that lethal force was being considered against a decorated veteran speaking at a patriotic ceremony. The optics were devastating for any attempt to characterize the situation as routine law enforcement. Mrs. Hayes' intervention proved crucial when federal agents attempted to rush the stage. Her position at the bake sale booth allowing her to create obstacles that slowed their approach, while giving community members time to position themselves between the agents and Maria. The sight of elderly military spouses physically blocking federal personnel from reaching a Medal of Honor recipient created powerful imagery that local news cameras captured from multiple angles. Patricia Chen's medical training became essential when the first federal agent attempted to use force against civilian obstacles. Her immediate response to treat injuries creating additional documentation of excessive federal action against peaceful community members. The presence of medical personnel also attracted additional media attention and provided protective cover for Maria's continued testimony. Frank Williamson's coordination with public works personnel enabled rapid establishment of crowd barriers that channeled federal agents into positions where their actions would be fully visible to civilian witnesses and media cameras. His construction background provided expertise in crowd management that prevented panic, while ensuring that evidence collection could continue despite escalating tensions. The conspiracy's desperation became evident when Senator Hawkins attempted to call for emergency federal intervention, claiming terrorist threats that would justify declaring martial law and suppressing media coverage. Her obvious coordination with federal agents confirmed her direct involvement in criminal activities, while demonstrating the political protection that had enabled years of corruption. Director Walsh's response assets activated when federal agents drew weapons against civilian participants. FBI personnel moving to arrest the corrupt agents while providing protection for Maria and community members. The intervention represented months of careful legal preparation that ensured legitimate federal authority could respond appropriately to documented criminal activity. Maria's revelation of specific details about weapons trafficking operations, including serial numbers, financial transactions, and military personnel involved in the conspiracy, provided information that could be immediately verified through official databases. The real-time fact-checking process confirmed her credibility while exposing the scope of corruption that had enabled the conspiracy to operate. Thompson's coordination with local law enforcement ensured that federal evidence was preserved and protected from tampering by corrupt agents, his military police background providing expertise in evidence handling that would be crucial for subsequent legal proceedings. His relationships within the veteran community also helped maintain crowd control during the escalating confrontation. The turning point came when Danny Morrison's live stream revealed federal agents preparing to use lethal force against Maria, despite her obvious cooperation and the peaceful nature of the community gathering. The footage of armed federal personnel targeting a Medal of Honor recipient at a Memorial Day ceremony created national outrage that made political suppression impossible. Community members' spontaneous protection of Maria demonstrated the power of civic engagement when citizens understand the stakes involved in institutional corruption. Veterans, military spouses, and civilian neighbors formed human barriers that forced federal agents to choose between mass violence against patriotic Americans or accepting that their operation had failed. Senator Hawkins' arrest occurred when she attempted to flee the scene, her panicked departure providing additional evidence of guilt while removing her political protection from the corruption she had enabled. The sight of federal agents arresting a sitting senator during a patriotic ceremony created symbolic imagery that reinforced Maria's testimony about the conspiracy's reach. Father Miguel's closing prayer transformed the chaotic confrontation into a moment of community healing, his words about truth, justice, and redemption providing spiritual context for the morning's revelations. His military chaplain background gave him credibility with both veteran and civilian participants, helping to process the emotional impact of discovering institutional betrayal. The aftermath of Maria's public revelation extended far beyond Millfield's Memorial Day ceremony, triggering congressional investigations, military reform initiatives, and media coverage that exposed systematic corruption throughout multiple government agencies. Her survival and testimony provided the catalyst for accountability measures that had been blocked by political considerations for years. Criminal prosecutions resulting from the evidence Maria provided led to convictions of 47 individuals, including military personnel, federal agents, defense contractors, and political figures. The sentences ranged from financial penalties for minor participants to life imprisonment for those directly responsible for murdering American soldiers to protect their criminal enterprise. Military reforms implemented in response to the scandal included enhanced oversight of weapons shipments, mandatory rotation of personnel in sensitive positions, and independent investigation protocols for suspicious combat deaths. The changes addressed systemic vulnerabilities that had enabled the conspiracy while honoring the sacrifice of soldiers who had died protecting corrupt operations. Community impact in Millfield reflected broader themes of civic engagement and democratic participation that emerged from Maria's decision to trust her neighbors with dangerous truths. The experience of successfully confronting federal corruption strengthened local institutions while creating models for other communities facing similar challenges with institutional accountability. Maria's transition from hidden survivor to public advocate represented personal growth that balanced her military training with civilian values, demonstrating that heroism could take many forms depending on circumstances and community needs. Her willingness to risk everything for justice inspired similar courage in others who had witnessed corruption but lacked the skills or platform to expose it effectively. Thompson's role in supporting Maria's revelations led to his appointment as head of courthouse security reform, his military police background, and demonstrated integrity making him valuable for implementing changes that would prevent future misuse of government facilities. His personal healing from combat trauma was accelerated by the opportunity to serve justice rather than simply survive institutional betrayal. Mrs. Hayes received recognition for her leadership during the Memorial Day confrontation, her protection of Maria, and coordination of community response, demonstrating the crucial role played by civilian supporters in successful resistance to government corruption. Her example inspired other military spouses to become more actively engaged in oversight of institutional activities affecting their families. Danny Morrison's journalism project evolved into a nationally recognized investigation that earned him early admission to advanced programs and internship opportunities with major news organizations. His documentation of federal misconduct provided a model for citizen journalism that complemented traditional media coverage while ensuring that important stories couldn't be suppressed through institutional pressure. Patricia Chen's medical response during the confrontation influenced her decision to specialize in emergency medicine with focus on treating violence-related injuries, her experience highlighting the intersection between healthcare and social justice. Her nursing career became advocacy for communities affected by institutional violence and government misconduct. Frank Williamson's coordination skills led to his election as city council member, his practical experience and demonstrated community commitment, making him effective at implementing reforms that improved local government transparency and responsiveness. His leadership helped establish Millfield as a model for community-based accountability systems. Father Miguel's spiritual guidance during the crisis enhanced his reputation as a counselor for people dealing with moral conflicts between institutional loyalty and ethical obligations. His military chaplain background, combined with his civilian ministry experience, provided unique insights for people struggling with similar choices between duty and truth. The Medal of Honor that had once represented Maria's greatest security risk became a symbol of institutional accountability and civilian courage, displayed in the Millfield Courthouse as a reminder that heroism sometimes required defying the same authorities that bestowed recognition. The medal's journey from hidden shame to public honor reflected broader themes about the relationship between individual conscience and institutional power. Educational initiatives inspired by Maria's story included military ethics programs that addressed conflicts between orders and moral obligations, helping prepare future soldiers for situations where institutional loyalty might conflict with legal and ethical requirements. The training emphasized individual responsibility for maintaining military honor regardless of command pressure. International recognition of the Millfield incident influenced similar accountability movements in allied nations, demonstrating that corruption within military institutions represented global challenges requiring coordinated responses. Maria's willingness to expose American military misconduct strengthened international cooperation on security issues by demonstrating commitment to shared values over national embarrassment. Legislative changes resulting from congressional investigations included enhanced whistleblower protections for military personnel, independent oversight mechanisms for classified operations, and mandatory reporting requirements that would prevent future cover-ups of institutional misconduct. The reforms addressed systemic issues while honoring the sacrifice of those who had died exposing corruption. Media coverage of Maria's story emphasized themes of individual courage and community support that resonated beyond military contexts, inspiring civilian populations to take more active roles in holding government institutions accountable to democratic principles. The example of successful resistance to federal overreach provided hope for communities facing similar challenges. Memorial services for soldiers killed during the Afghanistan conspiracy were held with full military honors, their families finally learning the truth about sacrifices that had been dishonored by the corruption their deaths had exposed. The ceremonies provided closure while establishing their memory as motivation for continued vigilance against institutional betrayal. Economic recovery in communities affected by defense contractor corruption included job creation programs for veterans and military spouses, funded through penalties assessed against companies that had participated in weapons trafficking. The initiatives addressed practical consequences of institutional misconduct while providing opportunities for people who had suffered from government betrayal. Maria's decision to remain in Millfield rather than return to active military duty reflected her commitment to civilian communities and democratic institutions, demonstrating that service could take many forms beyond traditional military roles. Her grocery store continued to operate as a community gathering place where neighbors could discuss civic issues and coordinate responses to local challenges. Annual Memorial Day ceremonies in Millfield became models for community-based patriotic events that balanced respect for military service with accountability for institutional performance, attracting visitors from across the nation who wanted to experience authentic civic engagement. The events demonstrated that patriotism could include questioning authority when necessary to preserve democratic values. Veterans organizations nationwide adopted protocols inspired by Maria's experience, creating support networks for members who witnessed institutional misconduct while providing resources for effective response to corruption. The initiatives balanced loyalty to military institutions with obligations to uphold the values those institutions were supposed to represent. Academic research into the Millfield incident produced scholarship on civil-military relations, community organizing, and institutional accountability that influenced policy development and military training programs. The case study demonstrated practical applications of democratic theory while providing lessons for future challenges to institutional integrity. Maria's final reflection on her journey from decorated soldier to community advocate emphasized the evolution of her understanding about service and sacrifice, recognizing that protecting American values sometimes required challenging American institutions. Her willingness to risk everything for truth had ultimately strengthened both her community and her country, proving that individual courage could trigger systemic change when supported by engaged citizens who refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The transformation of Memorial Day in Millfield from routine patriotic ceremony to catalyst for national reform demonstrated the power of local action to influence broader political change, showing that democracy remained strongest when individual citizens accepted responsibility for holding their government accountable to the principles it claimed to represent. Maria's story became a reminder that heroes weren't just people who died for their country, but also those who lived to make it better. The ripple effects of Maria's revelation continued to expand long after the last news cameras had left Millfield, transforming not only the small Pennsylvania town, but reshaping conversations about military accountability across the nation. In the weeks following the Memorial Day confrontation, investigative journalists descended upon similar communities near military installations, searching for evidence of comparable corruption that might have been hidden beneath the surface of routine military operations. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Patricia, arrived from the Pennsylvania State Police's Public Corruption Unit 3 days after the ceremony to coordinate with federal investigators who were overwhelmed by the scope of evidence that Maria's testimony had unleashed. Chen's background in financial crimes proved essential for tracking the money trails that connected the Afghanistan weapons trafficking to domestic corruption networks that had operated for decades without serious investigation. The financial investigation revealed that the conspiracy's reach extended far beyond military weapons sales, encompassing construction contracts, logistics services, and technology procurement that had diverted hundreds of millions of dollars from legitimate military operations into private accounts controlled by the conspirators. The scope of theft had weakened American military readiness while enriching individuals who had violated their oaths to protect national security. Maria found herself thrust into a role she had never sought, but was uniquely qualified to fulfill: advocate for military families who had been victimized by institutional corruption. Her days became filled with meetings with congressional staffers, interviews with investigative journalists, and consultations with military reform organizations that had been fighting for years to address problems that were now impossible to ignore. The transition from grocery store clerk to national advocate required psychological adjustments that Maria hadn't anticipated when she made her decision to speak publicly. The grocery store had provided anonymity and routine that allowed her to process her trauma privately, while her new role demanded constant public engagement with memories and emotions she had spent 8 years learning to manage through solitude and community service. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a psychologist who specialized in treating former special operations personnel, began working with Maria to help her navigate the challenges of sudden public exposure while maintaining the emotional stability necessary for effective advocacy. Their sessions explored the complex relationship between Maria's military identity and her civilian development, recognizing that her effectiveness as an advocate stemmed from her ability to bridge both worlds. The therapeutic work revealed how much Maria had changed during her years in Millfield, evolving from someone who defined herself primarily through military achievement to a person whose identity was rooted in community relationships and civilian responsibilities. The Medal of Honor remained important to her, but not as validation of her worth or definition of her purpose. Thompson's courthouse security position evolved into a broader role, coordinating veteran services throughout the county. His military police background and demonstrated integrity, making him valuable for implementing transparency measures that would prevent future misuse of government facilities. His personal relationships with local veterans provided insights into community needs that had been overlooked by traditional bureaucratic approaches. The courthouse itself became a symbol of successful citizen resistance to government corruption, attracting visitors from across the nation who wanted to see where a decorated veteran had confronted federal agents trying to silence her testimony. Tours led by Thompson included detailed explanations of the security measures that had been implemented to protect citizens exercising their constitutional rights. Mrs. Hayes decided to expand her grocery store involvement into a broader community organizing role, her experience during the Memorial Day confrontation having demonstrated her natural leadership abilities and deep understanding of local family dynamics. Her bake sale booth became a regular feature at community events, providing informal gathering spaces where neighbors could discuss civic issues and coordinate responses to local challenges. The relationships Mrs. Hayes had built with military spouses through her grocery store management proved invaluable for organizing support networks that addressed practical needs while building political awareness. Her kitchen table became an unofficial headquarters for voter registration drives, candidate forums, and policy discussions that had previously been dominated by people with less direct stake in military community welfare. Danny Morrison's journalism project attracted attention from major news organizations that recognized both his technical skills and his authentic understanding of military community dynamics. His scholarship applications emphasized his documentation of the Millfield incident, leading to early admission programs at universities with strong investigative journalism departments and internship opportunities with publications that specialized in government accountability reporting. The technical aspects of Danny's video documentation became study material for journalism schools teaching courses on citizen reporting and digital security, his work demonstrating how modern technology could enable individual citizens to document official misconduct in ways that traditional gatekeepers couldn't suppress. His example inspired similar projects in communities across the nation. Patricia Chen's nursing school experience was transformed by her medical response during the federal confrontation, her professors incorporating her real-world emergency medicine experience into classroom discussions about healthcare's role in social justice advocacy. Her clinical rotations included specialized training in treating violence-related injuries, preparing her for a career that would address both medical and social consequences of institutional misconduct. Medical professionals throughout the region began developing protocols for documenting injuries that might result from government violence against civilians. Patricia's experience highlighting gaps in traditional emergency medicine training that hadn't adequately prepared healthcare workers for treating victims of official misconduct. Her advocacy helped establish networks of medical professionals committed to protecting patients' rights regardless of political pressure. Frank Williamson's election to city council represented broader political changes occurring throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, as communities affected by military corruption began electing candidates who prioritized transparency and accountability over traditional party affiliations. His practical construction experience proved valuable for infrastructure projects, while his demonstrated integrity attracted support from voters who had lost trust in conventional politicians. The city council reforms Frank championed included mandatory disclosure requirements for government contracts, public access to budget discussions, and community oversight of federal agency activities within municipal boundaries. These measures created models that other communities adapted for their own accountability initiatives. Father Miguel's role as spiritual counselor expanded to include consultation with military chaplains who were struggling to address ethical conflicts within their own institutions. His experience with Maria's situation having demonstrated the importance of supporting service members who faced choices between institutional loyalty and moral obligations. His guidance helped establish protocols for protecting military personnel who reported misconduct through appropriate channels. Religious institutions throughout the region began offering sanctuary services for whistleblowers and their families. Father Miguel's example, having demonstrated that spiritual communities had both moral obligations and practical capabilities for protecting people who exposed institutional corruption. The network provided both physical security and emotional support for individuals facing retaliation. Educational initiatives inspired by Maria's story included military ethics courses at service academies that used the Afghanistan conspiracy as a case study for analyzing conflicts between orders and legal obligations. The curriculum emphasized individual responsibility for maintaining military honor regardless of command pressure, helping prepare future officers for situations where they might need to choose between career advancement and ethical behavior. Civilian educational programs included high school civics courses that examined the Millfield incident as an example of effective citizen participation in government accountability, demonstrating how individual courage combined with community support could address institutional problems that traditional political processes had failed to resolve. The curriculum emphasized practical skills for civic engagement alongside theoretical knowledge about democratic institutions. Legal developments resulting from the investigation included Supreme Court cases that clarified constitutional protections for military whistleblowers, establishing precedents that would protect future service members who exposed institutional misconduct. The decisions balanced national security considerations with individual rights, creating frameworks that encouraged accountability while maintaining operational security. Congressional legislation inspired by Maria's testimony included enhanced oversight mechanisms for classified military operations, mandatory rotation policies for personnel in sensitive positions, and independent investigation protocols for suspicious combat deaths. The reforms addressed systemic vulnerabilities while honoring the sacrifice of soldiers who had died protecting corrupt operations. International recognition of the Millfield incident influenced military accountability movements in allied nations. Maria's willingness to expose American institutional misconduct, strengthening international cooperation by demonstrating commitment to shared values over national embarrassment. NATO partners implemented similar oversight measures, while United Nations peacekeeping operations adopted protocols based on lessons learned from the Afghanistan conspiracy investigation. Economic development in Millfield reflected broader themes about community resilience and civic engagement, local businesses benefiting from increased tourism, while military families relocated to the area specifically because of its reputation for accountability and veteran support. The economic growth demonstrated that transparency and integrity could strengthen communities rather than undermining them. Veterans organizations nationwide adopted support protocols inspired by Maria's experience, creating networks for members who witnessed institutional misconduct while providing resources for effective response to corruption. The initiatives balanced loyalty to military institutions with obligations to uphold the values those institutions were supposed to represent. Memorial services for soldiers killed during the Afghanistan conspiracy provided closure for families while establishing their memory as motivation for continued vigilance against institutional betrayal. The ceremonies honored their sacrifice while acknowledging that their deaths had exposed corruption that endangered other service members. Academic research into the Millfield incident produced scholarship on civil-military relations, community organizing, and institutional accountability that influenced policy development and training programs. The case study demonstrated practical applications of democratic theory while providing lessons for future challenges to institutional integrity. Maria's decision to establish a foundation focused on supporting military families affected by institutional corruption reflected her evolution from individual survivor to community advocate, her Medal of Honor providing credibility, while her civilian experience offered insights into practical support needs. The Foundation's work addressed both immediate assistance and long-term policy advocacy. Annual Memorial Day ceremonies in Millfield became pilgrimage destinations for veterans and military families, seeking authentic expressions of patriotism that balanced respect for service with accountability for institutional performance. The events demonstrated that love of country could include questioning authority when necessary to preserve democratic values. Regional economic development included job creation programs for veterans and military spouses, funded through penalties assessed against companies that had participated in weapons trafficking. The initiatives addressed practical consequences of institutional misconduct, while providing opportunities for people who had suffered from government betrayal. Thompson's coordination with veteran service organizations throughout Pennsylvania created networks for sharing information about potential corruption, while providing support for individuals who faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. His law enforcement background provided credibility with civilian authorities, while his military experience offered understanding of institutional pressures. Community development projects in Millfield included a Veteran Services Center that provided both practical assistance and gathering spaces for civic engagement. The facility designed to accommodate wheelchair accessibility while offering meeting rooms where military families could discuss policy issues and coordinate advocacy efforts. The center became a model for similar facilities in other communities. Mrs. Hayes's organizing work expanded to include coordination with military spouse networks throughout the region, her experience during the Memorial Day confrontation having demonstrated the crucial role played by civilian supporters in successful resistance to government corruption. Her leadership inspired other military spouses to become more actively engaged in oversight activities. The grocery store where Maria had worked became a local landmark, Mrs. Hayes installing a small memorial plaque that honored the soldiers who had died during the Afghanistan conspiracy, while celebrating the civilian courage that had exposed the truth about their sacrifice. The store continued to serve as an informal community center, where neighbors could gather and discuss civic issues. Danny Morrison's college journalism program included internships with news organizations that specialized in military accountability reporting. His undergraduate work focusing on the intersection between technology and transparency in government oversight. His career trajectory reflected broader trends towards citizen journalism that complemented traditional media coverage. Patricia Chen's nursing career included specialization in emergency medicine, with focus on treating violence-related injuries, her experience during the federal confrontation having highlighted the intersection between healthcare and social justice. Her professional development included advocacy training that prepared her to address both medical and social consequences of institutional misconduct. Frank Williamson's city council service included coordination with municipal governments throughout Pennsylvania that were implementing transparency measures inspired by Millfield's example, his practical experience and demonstrated integrity making him valuable for policy development that balanced accountability with operational efficiency. His leadership helped establish regional networks for sharing best practices. Father Miguel's expanded ministry included consultation with religious communities that were developing sanctuary protocols for whistleblowers and their families, his experience with Maria's situation having demonstrated both the moral obligations and practical capabilities of spiritual institutions for protecting people who exposed corruption. His guidance helped establish networks that provided both physical security and emotional support. The Medal of Honor display in the courthouse became part of regular tours that attracted visitors from across the nation, Thompson's presentations explaining both the historical significance of the decoration and its role in exposing institutional corruption. The display served as a reminder that heroism could take many forms depending on circumstances and community needs. Legislative developments at the state level included Pennsylvania's adoption of comprehensive military family protection measures that addressed financial assistance, educational support, and health care access for families affected by institutional misconduct. The legislation served as a model for similar measures in other states with significant military populations. Federal policy changes resulting from the investigation included enhanced training programs for military personnel who served in positions where they might encounter corruption. The curriculum emphasizing both recognition of misconduct and appropriate reporting procedures. The training balanced operational security considerations with individual responsibilities for maintaining institutional integrity. International military education programs began incorporating case studies based on the Afghanistan conspiracy investigation, using Maria's example to teach officers from allied nations about the importance of individual integrity in maintaining institutional credibility. The curriculum emphasized shared democratic values while respecting different national approaches to military organization. Research institutions throughout the United States began studying the Millfield incident as an example of successful community organizing around military accountability issues. The case providing insights into how civilian populations could effectively address institutional problems that traditional political processes had failed to resolve. The academic attention helped legitimize community-based approaches to government oversight. Maria's speaking engagements at military installations throughout the nation provided opportunities for service members to hear directly from someone who had faced the choice between institutional loyalty and moral obligations. Her presentations emphasizing both the personal costs and broader benefits of choosing integrity over convenience. Her military background provided credibility, while her civilian experience offered hope for life after service. The long-term impact of Maria's decision to speak publicly extended far beyond the specific conspiracy she had exposed, inspiring broader conversations about the relationship between individual conscience and institutional authority in democratic societies. Her example demonstrated that heroism wasn't limited to battlefield actions, but could include the courage to challenge corrupt systems regardless of personal cost. Community development in Millfield included establishment of educational programs that taught civic engagement skills to high school students, the curriculum based on lessons learned during the Memorial Day confrontation about the importance of individual participation in democratic institutions. The programs emphasized practical skills for effective citizenship alongside theoretical knowledge about government accountability. Regional veterans organizations adopted support protocols that addressed both the psychological and practical needs of military families affected by institutional corruption, the networks providing assistance with legal challenges, financial difficulties, and employment discrimination that often resulted from exposure of official misconduct. The services addressed gaps in traditional veteran support systems. The transformation of Memorial Day observances throughout Pennsylvania reflected broader changes in how communities understood the relationship between patriotism and accountability, ceremonies increasingly emphasizing citizen responsibilities alongside military sacrifice. The evolution demonstrated that love of country could include willingness to challenge institutions when they failed to live up to democratic ideals. Maria's reflection on her journey from decorated soldier to community advocate emphasized her growing understanding that service to country could take many forms, her military experience providing skills while her civilian relationships had taught her about the values worth protecting. Her story became a reminder that democracy required active participation from citizens who were willing to hold their government accountable to the principles it claimed to represent. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.